Welcome to Mrs. Gathman's video on lab safety. Start off with, why is lab safety important? Well, it's important because we want to make sure that you guys don't injure yourselves or myself or your classmates. And the lab safety rules help prevent these injuries as long as they are being followed. So let's start off with, what are the lab safety rules? First thing is, always follow the teacher's directions and only do lab work when a teacher is present. So please do not, if the teacher is not in the room, please do not be doing lab work. That includes if you come into class early and there's lab equipment out, don't touch it. The next thing is, conduct yourself in a responsible manner at all times, no horseplay. So when lab equipment is out, or actually anytime you enter the classroom, you should not be goofing around because there's lab equipment and glassware out. Usually it could just be a demonstration setup. It doesn't necessarily always have to be at your desks. Do not touch any equipment, chemicals, or other materials until you are told to do so. It is quite common that on a lab day that there will be equipment or chemicals at your desk. And it's important that you don't touch those chemicals and you just leave them alone until you are told that you can start working on the lab. It's possible that you could hurt yourself or you could damage the equipment if you start touching the equipment and before you're before you're told what you're going to be doing with it. Do not eat food, drink beverages, or chew gum in the lab. Do not use lab glassware as food or beverage containers. And we're going to talk about more about that later. So continue with the lab safety rules. No makeup in class, and that includes chapstick. The reason for no makeup in class is because makeup and chapstick both have a tacky appearance, and I don't mean that in like a fashion sense type of way. I mean that in a physical characteristic sense, in that they are kind of sticky. And so if there's chemicals that get in the air, and they're going to be sticking to your face. So that's why I do not want you guys applying makeup in class. And again, that does include chapstick. Report all accidents to your teacher immediately, even if you think it's minor. Even if it's something as small as a paper cut, please let the teacher know. We'll give you a Band-Aid or take care of it appropriately, because something that you think is minor could actually be something major, and taking care of it right away can minimize the damage. Use proper lab techniques to prevent accidents. So there are certain ways that we do things to minimize the risk of that activity, and we'll go through a list of those at the end of the presentation. So, why can't we eat in lab? I have a little video to start you guys off, and then we'll discuss it a little bit more after that.
Eating and drinking are not permitted in areas where chemical, radiological, and/or biological materials are used or stored. Oh, come on. All food and beverages must be stored in designated food storage refrigerators in the laboratory. What? The term eating and drinking refers to eating, drinking, smoking. Ah, dang it. Oops. My grandpappy always told me, what you don't know can't hurt you. You have the legal right to know about the substance you work with, the proper lab safety, blah, 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 whatever.
Hey man, you owe me $30 for this phone bill here. Dude, what are you doing? Sitting around watching TV all day?
Lay off.
Oh, dude, your face!
What's his problem?
So, more than likely, you're not going to grow a third eye from consuming something in the lab. But the reality is that you could actually poison yourself. So, you're not allowed to eat in lab, even if it's not on a lab day, because there could be residue on the desks from somebody that was working in the lab prior to you, or there could be stuff in the lab for another class, and it's possible, even when things are well labeled, that you might mix up the containers. Additionally, you should not eat or drink out of any lab equipment, even if the substance in it is a food product. So, pouring that soda into a beaker is not a good idea, mostly because you don't know what's been in the glassware previously. There could have been a highly concentrated acid in there, there could have been a poisonous chemical, and then there could still be a residue in there. Even if it is washed really well, you can still have a chemical residue in there, and then that is being consumed when you drink out of it. Clothing. On lab days, one of the lab rules is that you wear proper clothing, and so things you should wear on lab days: goggles or safety glasses, and we have goggles in our classroom. Closed-toed shoes, and that means shoes that cover your entire foot, not just your toes, but your entire foot. Regular lace-up gym shoes meet that requirement, and if you are a constant sandal wearer, then you are welcome to keep your shoes in my classroom and just get them on lab days so you don't have to think about what you're wearing. Clothing made of natural-based fibers such as cotton, and tie back long hair. So the fiber made of natural fibers is because they are less flammable, and they're also more resistant to chemicals. Things not to wear. You should not wear sandals. They don't protect your foot. You should not wear jewelry. You should not wear loose or baggy clothing. So why do I want you guys wearing closed-toed shoes? Well, they protect your feet from chemical spills and from broken glass. And so really we're trying to avoid something like this. So this is a pretty nasty picture of an alkali burn, which means it was a compound that is spilled on this foot that's actually the opposite of an acid. So it was a base that was spilled on this foot. And it looks like a pretty nasty chemical burn, and wearing closed-toed shoes can help prevent that. Goggles. So goggles protect your eyes from chemicals, broken glass, and other hazards. And it's important that those goggles are worn on your eyes or over your eyes and not on top of your head or over your neck. I know sometimes the goggles aren't that comfortable, but I'd rather have a little bit of discomfort than have something like this happen to my eye. So yes, this is a chemical burn in an eye, so please make sure that the goggles get worn over your eyes and that you're not taking them off in the middle of lab, and they get worn over your eyes until everybody in the lab is cleaned up. The teacher will let you know when you can take your goggles off. Why do you have to tie back long hair and avoid baggy clothing? And by the way, tying back long hair is for both boys and girls. As long as your hair is long enough to be tied back, you should tie it back. And we are trying to avoid this. Yes, this is Jack from The Incredibles. And then also another movie clip. But in reality, if you have baggy clothing or long hair that's not tied back, it is a fire hazard. It's also a hazard of hitting chemical equipment and, or getting draped into chemicals and without knowing it. So if you have baggy clothing at lab day, we need to find ways to secure that clothing so that it's no longer baggy. There's lab safety equipment in the classroom that is meant to, in some cases, prevent accidents, but also in other cases to deal with accidents if they do happen. So the first one is a safety shower. It looks like that. It's in the wall of our classroom. And the safety shower is important for when you get a large amount of chemical on your body. And it's going to, if it's on an extremity, you're just going to wash it off in the sink. But if you get it on your body, then you're going to need to go to the safety shower. And next one is an eye wash. And the eye wash is right next to the safety shower in our classroom and looks similar to this. All you do is you pull back on the handle and water starts running out, and you would need to put your eyes under that if you get a chemical in your eye. And you use the eye wash for 15 minutes. It's quite a long time to have your eyes under running water, and it is very uncomfortable. And I would much rather just wear goggles over my eyes than have to endure that. A safety shower is for 5 minutes, and it's really cold water for 5 minutes. So again, it seems really long when you're under that. Safety goggles, they look like this, and this is a preventative measure that we kind of already talked about a little bit. Again, they just keep your eyes safe from broken glass and chemicals. And it is just best to assume that you are going to be wearing them in the lab unless the teacher specifically says you do not need them. Another piece of lab safety equipment is a fire extinguisher, and that is to put out objects on fire. The next one is a fire blanket, and that is to put out a person on fire. You don't use a fire extinguisher on a person because it is dangerous to that person. A lot of them are CO2 based, and that makes it very difficult to breathe when CO2 is being sprayed at you. They're also really cold and can cause damage because of that as well. So again, you use a fire blanket on a person on fire and a fire extinguisher on objects that are on fire. And this next one is a fume hood, and it's a little bit more foreign to people, but the fume hood is basically a large vent that you do chemical reactions in this portion of it over here, and there's a fan up in this part that draws air from the room up into if you have a chemical reaction that produces fumes or toxic fumes of any kind, then what happens is that you turn the fume hood on and it draws the air up over it, and it takes those fumes out of the room. So it disperses them when we're into a more dilute environment so that they're not toxic. So our fire extinguisher will be right here. There's our fire extinguisher. Our fire blanket is right next to, in the cabinetry, next to the fire extinguisher. Our safety shower, so this is my desk up here. Our safety shower is right here. And right next to that is our eye wash. And then over here, in this wall here, is our fume hood. We find our goggle cabinet over here. And then additionally in our classroom, we have a sharps container, and that's actually going to be under the fire extinguisher because the fire extinguisher is in the wall. So our sharps container is also going to be right here, and that's where you're going to dispose of any broken glass. And the only thing that should be in there is broken glass, and that is it's a red plastic container. You'll have a trash can here. There should be a trash can here, a small one. There should be another trash. There should be two big trash cans in the back, and another small trash can right there in the front of the classroom. So you guys know where you can be throwing things out. Please do not use the sinks at the tables as your trash can. I don't want to find any trash in those, because those are just for water. They are not for anything else. Okay, so that tells us where to find things in our classroom. Now, accidents and injuries. What do you do if you do get injured? It's important that you know this so that if it does happen, then we know how to handle it, and we're not have undue anxiety about it. So first thing is again, you just report accidents and injuries to your teacher immediately, even if it's really small and minor. Please let the teacher know so it can be handled appropriately, and that way if it is something bigger than what you think it is, it gets handled before it becomes a larger problem. So things that you need to be aware of: safety hazards associated with each chemical you use. Most of these are going to be discussed before we do a lab, but just in general, where you can find this information, you can find it on a chemical label. So the label of containers have the safety information on it. You can find it on the lab handout, and you can find it on something called the material safety data sheet. That's actually an outdated thing. It's actually a material safety or material safety sheet now. But if you say MSDS, most people still know what you're talking about. And then if you have an eye accident, if you get something in your eye, you're going to have to wash your eye out with water under the eye wash for at least 15 minutes. And again, that is going to seem like an excessively long time. It is a long time to be washing out your eye. And it is not going to be a comfortable experience for you. Fire burns. If you catch on fire, then you're going to stop, drop, and be covered with a fire blanket or soaked with water. It's important that if you do end up covering someone with a fire blanket, that you don't remove clothing that's stuck to that person. If you do, more than likely, you are going to be removing layers of skin as well, and we don't want that. So let the medical professionals that you're going to get help from immediately deal with the clothing for that person. If you get broken glass, this is actually probably the one that happens most commonly. It happens every year. You're gonna let the teacher know, and you're gonna clean it up with a broom and dustpan. And then you're gonna put the glass in the sharps container. Make sure that you're not picking up that broken glass with your hands. You're very likely to get cuts that way. And not only that, a lot of times that glass has had chemicals on it, so then you're gonna get cuts. Not only are you gonna get cuts, but you're gonna get chemicals in those cuts. So that compounds the problem. And then, like I said, you're going to put that glass in the sharps container. Waste disposal. Make sure that you ask the teacher where or how to dispose of any waste that you have. A waste bottle will be supplied for any substance that cannot go down the drain. So if it's not supposed to go down the drain, you're going to have a waste beaker provided for you to collect all that waste. And things that you should never do when you have waste from the lab or just extra chemicals from the lab: never take them home, because you shouldn't be taking the chemicals home. Never pour them down the drain without asking first, and don't put chemicals back in their original container. The reason you're not supposed to put them back in their original container is because if they're contaminated, then you can contaminate the entire supply of that chemical. So they get stored, chemicals that have been put out or are extra that have been exposed to the room get stored in their own container rather than being put back into that original container. Okay, now this is the proper way to do things that we talked about, mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. So the first thing is, if you're told to smell a chemical, it's important that you waft that chemical and you don't smell it directly. So what is wafting? Well, here we have a gentleman demonstrating wafting. It's just it dilutes the amount of chemical that is entering your nose, so you get much less of it, but it's enough to detect an odor as well. The next thing is, if you're asked to dilute an acid, it's important that you always add acid to water, because water has an amazing ability to absorb energy. So when you dilute an acid, it actually releases a lot of energy and increases temperature quite quickly. Water, because it has that ability to absorb that energy without changing temperature. It's important to add the acid to the water so that you reduce a large temperature change. If you add water to acid, and there's not much water there to absorb that temperature change, you can actually end up having it explode on you, and then you have acid, highly concentrated acid all over you. So not recommended. Next thing is, and you'll be doing a lot of this, is to be weighing chemicals. So it's important that, so this is a triple beam balance, and these are at every lab station in our classroom, that you don't just pour chemicals directly onto this metal balance pan, because if you do that, then you're going to have chemicals reacting with the balance pan, or you'll have chemicals reacting with old chemicals that are on there, and either way, that's not a good situation that we want to have. So it's important that you use weigh paper or a weigh boat first. So you would put that weigh paper down or weigh boat down, and then weigh out your chemical. And then you're also going to slowly add the chemical to the balance until you reach the desired mass. You're not just going to put a whole bunch on and then take it off. The reason you want to add a little until you get the amount that you want is so that you're not wasting it. It reduces the amount of waste, since we can't put that waste back into the original container. Measuring volume. When you put liquid into a graduated cylinder, into any tube, you're going to see this curve at the surface of it, and that's called the meniscus. So when you're measuring, you want to get your eye level with the bottom of the meniscus. And when you do that, you're not going to do that by bringing the graduated cylinder up to your eye. You're going to lower your eye to the graduated cylinder to the level of the meniscus. So that means you might actually have to bend down to get yourself there. And the reason you want to do that is because if you lift it up, it's not necessarily going to be level, so you might not get an accurate volume, but you're also less likely to spill it. So you want to make sure that you, again, that you lower yourself to the level of that meniscus. Additionally, when you are using a graduated cylinder, the graduated cylinders in our classroom have this wonderful plastic piece, a chunk of plastic that is at the top of them, and it goes out a little ways like this. And it's important that that plastic piece stays at the top of the graduated cylinder. It is not there to help you with your measuring. And a lot of students use it to try and mark off a measurement and down here. It's actually to keep this piece of plastic is there so that if this gets knocked over, it keeps the glass from breaking. So that's why I want you to keep it at the top of the cylinder, because if you have it down here and this cylinder tips over, then the part up here is going to hit the table first and it's going to shatter everywhere. So again, this plastic piece at the top, keep it at the top, keep it above all the writing on the graduated cylinder, and that's going to be high enough that it'll work for you. Next thing is if you're told to heat a chemical in a test tube, you need to make sure that you point the test tube at an angle away from all people. So this gentleman here is doing an excellent job of that. He's pointing the test tube at an angle. So if this Bunsen burner flame here is heating the test tube, then if this substance in the test tube were to pop or boil, it's going to go vertical up this way, and if it splatters anywhere, then it's just going to hit the top of that test tube, and it's not going to come out at you. But if he was holding it vertically, then it would come, and it boiled up over, then it would come out, and it could get all over you. The next one is pipetting. So a pipette is this guy right over here. It looks kind of like a turkey baster, but there's usually increments of measurement on here. So it's actually a very good way of measuring volume, but you have to find a way. There has to be a way to draw the liquid up into the pipette. So this is pipetting by mouth. You don't want to be doing this, because when you do that, you run the risk of actually ingesting the chemical into your mouth. So instead, you want to use what's called a pipette bulb, and that's this red piece over here that has the that allows you to draw the liquid up into the pipette and measure it appropriately. So there's consequences if you choose to disobey these rules or break the rules, and when you choose to do that, then you put everyone in the classroom at risk. And because of that, unsafe lab behavior will not be tolerated. And because different violations of these rules have varying risks associated with them, the consequences will vary with the offense. So I can't tell you exactly what will happen to you if you choose to violate these rules, but what I can guarantee you is that you will think, whatever the consequence is, that it will be harsh for what you did. So please make smart choices in the lab and adhere to these rules, and we will have a great year in lab.